Faith Kipygeon, the 4-minute mile. It's a barrier that may be one of the most famous in athletics, the story of Roderick Bannister and how he broke what many considered to be one of the greatest feats ever accomplished in the sport. And now Nike was going to go after the 4-minute mile again, facing what seemed like near impossible odds. As so many people did not think this event had a chance of succeeding. This is more of a video discussing why I think this event ended up the way it did, looking more at why the result happened the way it happened, rather than if it was necessarily a super successful event or not. Disclaimer, as these are just my thoughts, and I do think there is a lot to talk about. From the very different energy systems required in the mile versus the marathon to the World Athletics scoring tables, but on the event itself, I will say that a lot of people probably had their own thoughts, and well, that's okay. I will say this. Yes, the event didn't achieve its ultimate goal, but it did bring a lot of attention to the sport. And also, who knows, maybe it does inspire a faster attempt in the future. Was it ambitious? Yes, but you also have to say you never know if you don't try. And Faith Kipygeon did try, regardless of the result. There's respect in that, because I think anyone who's run the mile or other events knows just how difficult those races are. That's why there's a camaraderie in running, a sense of respect for each other, really no matter your ability level, because the adversity we go through is something we can all relate to as runners. This race featured the world's best 1500-meter runner, Faith Kipygeon. Olympic gold medalist in 2024, Kipygeon would return to the track in Paris with a very different sort of goal in mind, this time to run not only faster than any woman had run over the mile distance, but also a lot faster, and by a lot faster, a lot faster. But I think one race that left some promise in this Breaking4 attempt was how Kipygeon ran a 4:07 mile at Monaco in what was a very epic performance at the time. Now, Kipygeon did not have the pacing that the Breaking4 attempt would have, but she did have those lights, which served as guidance once the pacemaker stepped away. I do think it's interesting because, yes, 4:07 is not 3:59. It's not really in the same area. Even if it's 7 seconds from the barrier, it's still a lot of time. Yet Nike, just as with the Breaking2 project, had some ways to find those seconds of time. And that starts with the very easy to see advantage, the pacers. I think one source of support for just how well pacers can guide someone to an amazing world record is what happened with Kipygeon for the 2:09 marathon world record. Kipygeon essentially had pacemakers the entire time in this race, and this time sub 2:10 in the marathon is something that I think a lot of people may think is very close to running something like a sub 4-minute mile. Well, according to the World Athletics scoring tables, that may not really be true. Now, I'm not saying it's never possible to run a sub 4-minute mile. This is just what World Athletics says. And that's that the marathon world record time on the women's side is not equivalent to a sub 4-minute mile. Rather, it's more equivalent to, say, a 4:05-ish, 4:04-ish mile. However, on the men's scoring table, it is equivalent to a sub 4 mile. Just interesting to point that out again. Not saying that sub 4 won't happen, it absolutely could, but rather it's going to take some even higher scoring points for it to happen. I do like sometimes to reference these scoring tables because while they aren't always indicative of what you could run, and I don't think they're really meant to be compared, it does give some sort of standard to compare times to across different events. I also want to make what I think is a point that shouldn't be underestimated. The marathon is not the mile, and the mile is not the marathon. If we look at the men's side, you would think a lot of men have both sub 4 mile PRs and sub 2:10 marathon times. However, this actually isn't really the case. The sub 4 and sub 2:10 club isn't really all that common, actually. Now, this is for one person running both those times, but it shows you how different the mile and the marathon are. A marathon, after all, is 26.2 miles, and they usually require very different types of training to be successful at. And what works in one event may not work in the other. While this was an event that definitely had some similarities to both Breaking2 and the Ineos 159 attempts, it was still very different. The marathon is, well, a marathon. Efficiency gains really add up over time, and it's really an event that focuses on efficiency through aerobic strength and endurance. The shoe developed for these attempts was something that I think really aided in that. And we'll talk more about that. The thing is, I think in some sense, the mile may be harder to unlock innovative technology than, say, the marathon, besides a shift in shoe technology that would simply make you faster. Super shoes in the marathon do make you faster, yes, but I think that arises from a main benefit, both anecdotally and scientifically, in how they reduce the impact forces on your body over the course of a long distance race like the marathon. Super shoes are not super shoes without the cushioning. Cushioning that isn't slow, but rather reactive and responsive, returning in energy at faster paces. Super shoes are essentially a product of the Breaking 2 event and trying to break the 2 hour marathon barrier. Of course, there's limits that have been placed on the shoes, but if you go to any marathon today, it's essentially all super shoes, Nike, Adidas, New Balance, etc. And yes, the super shoe technology has made its way to the track, but I also think you could argue that the cushioning doesn't add up quite as well when your events get shorter and shorter. On the topic of drafting, I'm sure Nike took quite a while to figure out the optimal pacing formation, but watching it actually unfold, it seems like there's a lot of moving parts to this type of formation. In some sense, there may just be some advantage of keeping things in a more simple sort of alignment and not having pacers all around. An athlete kind of gives the appearance of getting boxed in almost like in a track race. And as a runner, I feel like sometimes you appreciate a bit more open space on your sides. I don't know, and I'm sure there's a reason for this strategic formation that was chosen aerodynamically, but sometimes just having one person right in front of you is the easiest thing to really pace yourself. I understand on the roads, this is what Kipchoge had, but I think on the roads, it's easier to form this type of formation and run in a straight line most of the time. The pace on the roads is also slower than the sub 4 mile pace required on the track. In a way, though, regardless of the time, I think this event really helped the sport, but it does bring into question if we are going too fast, improving too quickly to the point where these things like world records or even going much faster than the world records are not having the effect they used to. In some sense, I think this race may have been a good result that shows just how difficult it is to run a world record and just how difficult it is to make a large jump beyond that world record. That being said, I do think the sport of athletics can still be a very fun one, even if it doesn't have events like this. They do get a lot of attention. But as we see from the Olympics, athletics can be popular, but it still needs to find the right formula, knowing how often athletes can race and stuff to make it more mainstream on a consistent basis. That's not something I think has been really figured out yet. Yeah, I think we've also learned it can be something that is difficult, but this event, I believe, had the intrigue to it that made it such a great event to watch. An event like this attempting to break a very legendary barrier later.